All right, let's dive straight into this explainer and uncover the truth behind one of the absolute most misunderstood concepts in modern digital audio. We're going to break down the exact mathematics and the hard limits behind a technology that a ton of people assume has no limits at all. Yep, we're talking about 32-bit floating point audio. If you're working in music production, sound design, or really any field touching modern digital audio, you've definitely heard this almost magical claim. It gets repeated constantly in forums, software manuals, and studio control rooms everywhere. You literally cannot clip 32-bit float because it has infinite headroom. Honestly, it sounds incredible, right? But here is the industry secret we need to talk about. That statement is just technically wrong. Now, it became popular because the usable headroom in 32-bit float is so ridiculously massive that it absolutely feels infinite in standard daily use, but it is definitively finite. Today, we're pulling back the curtain, breaking down the actual math, and seeing exactly why this supposedly unbreakable format can and eventually will break. To really understand the myth, we first have to look at the trick that fuels it. We've all seen this famous digital magic trick online, or hey, probably done it ourselves. You crank a waveform by a massive amount, say plus 100 decibels, and it instantly turns into a terrifying solid block of distortion on your screen. But then you simply pull the gain back down, and the signal emerges completely unharmed and pristine. People see this and think, whoa, float is magic. But what's really happening is that your display is clipping visually, while internally, those numbers still exist. To understand how that actually works, we need to look at the architecture of the file itself. Under the hood, this all comes down to the math of the IEEE 754 single precision format. Those 32 bits aren't just a big bucket. They're sliced up for very specific jobs. One bit is dedicated to the sign, basically just determining if the wave is positive or negative. Then 8 bits are dedicated to the exponent. And finally, 23 bits make up what's called the mantissa, or the fraction. And this is where it gets super interesting, because it perfectly illustrates the separation of powers in this format. The mantissa handles the actual fine detail and precision of your audio wave, while the exponent handles the massive scale and overall range. This is fundamentally different from how standard audio files work, and it's the exact reason why a signal can absolutely blast past 0 decibels without clipping internally. This whole concept completely separates float from fixed point PCM audio like your standard 24-bit WAV files. A 24-bit integer stores amplitude directly. It effectively asks, how large is the number right now? And if you exceed the maximum value of about 8.3 million, boom, the waveform clips, information is permanently destroyed, and there's absolutely no recovery. But 32-bit float, it stores value scientifically. Instead of asking how large is the number, it essentially asks, where is the decimal point? It dynamically multiplies the mantissa by 2 to the power of the exponent. But wait, here is the hidden limitation that completely shatters the infinite headroom myth. Because that mantissa only stores 23 bits, plus one hidden leading bit that's inherent to the math, single precision 32-bit float effectively only ever has about 24 bits of actual precision. The precision isn't constant across that massive volume range. It is strictly limited by the mantissa. So what does that mean in the real world? It means that just like standard 24-bit PCM audio, you only ever have about 144 decibels of clean, usable precision at any given exact moment. If you're working right around unity gain, your audio is resting comfortably inside that 144 decibel pocket of detail. You do not have thousands of decibels of detail happening all at exactly the same time. So rather than picturing float as this infinitely deep bucket where nothing ever spills over, you should absolutely think of it as a moving 24-bit window. The exponent basically acts as a sliding scale, allowing that tight 24-bit window of detail to perfectly track the volume of your audio, up into the stratosphere or down into microscopic quietness. It perfectly preserves the magnitude relationships, which is really just logarithmic scaling. It's brilliant math for sure, but it's not magic. So if the precision isn't actually infinite, and we only have this 24-bit window sliding around, what happens when we really aggressively stress test this supposedly unbreakable format? Where does the float finally fail? Let's take a look at what actually goes down when the signal detail becomes smaller than the mantissa's precision. It escalates pretty wildly. It starts with that fun visual myth we talked about earlier. Hard clip the waveform, pull the gain down, signal looks great. Everyone claps. But if we push into scientific escalation by repeatedly applying massive recursive gain staging, we're talking boosting and reducing by 100 dB hundreds of times, we start to see the cracks. The moment you introduce heavy recursive feedback and oversampled saturation, the underlying math literally starts to fall apart. At those astronomical gains, the math simply runs out of resolution. The available representable values become enormously spaced apart. When you turn that audio back down to normal levels and inspect it, a null test against the original audio is going to completely fail. All that low-level detail vanishes into gross staircase quantization. Tiny variations get rounded away, weird harmonic artifacts emerge, the noise floor comes up, and eventually the software might just throw its hands up and spit out nan, not a number, or an infinity corruption error. Your audio is completely, permanently destroyed. Now, theoretically, the absolute maximum finite value in 32-bit float equates to a totally absurd plus 770 dB. But let's be real. Your usable precision collapses way before you hit that number. Practical digital signal processing becomes unstable and will corrupt your audio hundreds of decibels before you ever reach that hard ceiling. Depending on the plugin architecture, oversampling, and nonlinear processing you're running, that collapse is absolutely inevitable. Which brings us to a super practical question. If it can ultimately break, and if it only really holds 24 bits of precision at any one time, why on earth is 32-bit float the standard internal format for almost every modern DAW? Why not just stick to fixed point? Simple, because it acts as an incredible safety net, preventing accidental clipping during your mixing phase. Think about a standard processing chain. You might add a heavy EQ boost of plus 18 dB, follow that with compressor makeup gain of plus 12, run it through some heavy saturation, and then sum it all in parallel. In fixed point, you'd hit instant destruction and permanent clipping mid-chain. But in float, those signals are perfectly safe to blow past 0 decibels internally while you're working. However, here is the absolute golden rule you have to remember. Float protects your internal processing, not your final playback. Your digital-to-analog converter, streaming services like Spotify or Apple Music, your physical studio monitors, they all live in the real world, and they all require finite fixed-point outputs. Meaning, if your master fader is blasting excessive gain, it will absolutely clip the real world if you don't turn it down first. Float saves your life inside the box, but the real world is strictly fixed. And a quick heads up for anyone out there rocking those awesome new 32-bit field recorders. Yes, they are amazing, but remember, they just cleverly combine dual analog to digital converters, one for low gain, one for high gain. They stitch those together into a float file. That does not mean the physical microphone itself magically captured infinite dynamics. The laws of analog physics still apply. If the microphone capsule physically clips from extreme high air pressure, or you hit analog preamp saturation or mic self-noise, float cannot save that recording. When we strip away all the marketing hype, the deep DSP reality shows that 32-bit float isn't just inherently better in absolutely every way, it's simply a trade-off. You're trading the rock-solid constant precision and extreme gain stability of fixed point for a massive range and incredible clipping resistance. Fixed point gives you stable low-level accuracy, while floating point gives you relative accuracy that eventually gets unstable under extreme stress. It's incredibly flexible and mathematically scalable, but it's never infinite. So if we really want to be accurate, we've got to retire the infinite headroom myth once and for all. The truest way to describe this technology is that it provides an enormous amplitude range while maintaining a strict 24-bit level of precision at any given scale. It's just postponing clipping by replacing a fixed ceiling with a cleverly moving decimal point. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating final thought to chew on. If this famously indestructible format is really just a cleverly moving decimal point wrapped up in a visual illusion, what other digital audio miracles are hiding finite limitations right in plain sight? We tend to trust our software implicitly, but understanding the true math behind our tools empowers us to push them right up to the very edge without falling off. Keep questioning your tools, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.